Good day, everyone. I'm Andrew Treu, one of the ministers with the Reverend Marilyn Innes of the Epworth and the Lansdowne and the Hanover Park Methodist Church. A couple of weeks ago, we received a proposal from the circuit regarding the future of specifically the Epworth and the Lansdowne societies. We had a general meeting which was chaired by the Superintendent Minister, and then we had a follow-up meeting on the 2nd of October at Epworth. That meeting was recorded, but the audio quality was so bad that I've decided to do a separate recording of the presentation that I did at that particular meeting, so that everyone is up to speed in what is going on in our circuit at the moment, and the proposal that is before us as the societies of Epworth and of Lansdowne. So I'm going to take you through the presentation, and then at the end we are going to be suggesting a way forward from here. What the circuit is proposing is a reduction in staff next year from 4 ministers to 3 ministers. And we'll talk about a little bit later on how we got to this in our circuit. So next year there will only be 3 ministers in the circuit. The circuit is suggesting that these 3 ministers serve in 3 different sections of the circuit. The first minister who will be serving is the Reverend Carol Libber. She is the new Superintendent Minister. She has been appointed to our circuit from the 1st of January 2022. And the circuit is proposing that she serves the Claremont and Lansdowne sections of our circuit. And then the Reverend Sanele Nkubeni, he would be serving Ottery Road and Parkwood. And then the Reverend Graham Goodwin would be serving the Church Street Mission. There are 569 members altogether in the Claremont and Lansdowne section, 638 in the Ottery Road and Parkwood section, and then in the Church Street Mission section, there are 544 members altogether, which is made up of 384 members and then 160 service users. Those are people who are being ministered to from the Church Street Mission. And so there are all kinds of exciting mission activities at the moment going on at the Church Street Mission, and at the moment they are serving approximately 160 people during the week. So altogether they make up 544 members. The support staff for the Claremont and Lansdowne section, Mrs. Millie Stead, and then Mr. Paul Tasale, and then for the Ottery Road and Parkwood section, our evangelist Terence Chimoa would be ministering next year amongst the specifically the Parkwood community. Mr. Dennis Reuters, he will also be assisting at Parkwood. He will also continue to help out at the Hanover Park Church. And then Mr. Adrian Abrahams. And then the Church Street Mission, which would now include Hanover Park. We should have mentioned that earlier on. The Church Street Mission, including Hanover Park, has with Dennis Reuters, has the assistance of Miss Joyce Brown. The circuit has proposed a certain split in our budget, but that will be made clearer at the quarterly meeting, and we do have an idea of approximately how much our possible budget share would be, but more about that a little bit later on. Our circuit also has 2 active supernumeraries, the Reverend Marilyn Innes and the Reverend Lynette Peterson. Lynette is involved with the Church Street mission side of things, and of course she would continue there. And Marilyn is involved in the Epworth Lansdowne setup, and then obviously she would continue in her role in the Epworth Lansdowne community. So what the circuit is proposing is that Claremont and Kenilworth would be, first of all, Claremont and Kenilworth would be united into one society. They would have weekly services at Claremont and a monthly communion service at Kenilworth. And then the normal society processes apply. So the first part of the proposal that has an effect on us, because Carol Libber would be our minister next year, would be that Claremont and Kenilworth amalgamate. And now this is the part that really affects us. The circuit is proposing a newly formed society incorporating the previous Epworth and Lansdowne societies into one society. It shall be mainly lay-driven, but of course under the supervision of the Reverend Carol Libber. So the circuit is proposing that Epworth and Lansdowne form one amalgamated society from the 1st of January 2022. Stewards meetings would be chaired by a circuit steward, and there would be a quarterly leaders meeting which would be chaired by the minister. The Reverend Libber would chair those meetings. Services would be led by preachers weekly. There would be a monthly communion service by Reverend Libber, and then of course the Reverend Innes would also continue to be serving amongst us. She would be preaching once a month too, and so there would be a minister in our pulpit twice a month. The circuit is proposing that the Epworth church building be repurposed for income generation, and that all services shift to Lansdowne. That is the proposal from the circuit at this stage. So you might be asking the question, now that we are have the proposal for the amalgamation of Epworth and Lansdowne very firmly on the table, how did we get here? And of course we need to understand, I think, exactly the position that we've got into at the moment. And I think first of all we do need to say that the amalgamation of Epworth and Lansdowne has been long overdue. Discussions have been going on for over 20 years about the amalgamation of these two societies, and now that certainly circumstances have overtaken us, mainly due to what's happened with the COVID pandemic this past year, we do need to acknowledge that our amalgamation as Epworth and Lansdowne is long overdue. Secondly, and this is the part that really we cannot run away from, is that our finances have deteriorated quite dramatically over the past 2 to 3 years. Epworth, as a society on its own, owes the circuit 260,000 Rand in arrears assessment to the circuit. Our monthly assessment at the moment is 39,000, but we've been falling behind in our assessments ever since 2019. And so we do owe the circuit at this stage 260,000 Rand. Lansdowne owes the circuit 75,000 Rand. Not as bad as Epworth, but still it's a considerable figure given that the monthly assessment for Lansdowne is 22,000. And so Epworth is owing 260, Lansdowne is owing 75,000, which means that we are effectively being subsidized by the circuit at this stage. Altogether, the circuit is owed 510,000 Rand by the various societies that are in arrears in the circuit. and it's obvious that Epworth and Lansdowne make the bulk of those arrears in our circuit. And the figures that you see there, the 260 and the 75, are figures that are up to the end of September 2021. So we still haven't taken into account the rest of the year, October, November, and December. It's likely that our financial situation would deteriorate even further by the end of the year. And so the circuit itself has tried to mitigate this situation that we find ourselves in, this dreadful financial situation that we find ourselves in, by deriving income from the rental of 3 manses. So the Church Street manse is being rented to the bishop, and there is an income being derived from it. The Ottery Road manse is being rented out commercially, and there is an income being derived from it. And then the Epworth manse is being rented out to our evangelist. He is paying a nominal rental to stay there, but nonetheless he is paying something for staying in that manse. The circuit has also this past year reduced travelling allowances to ministers, especially when COVID was on the go. Travelling allowances were stopped altogether. And then the circuit has also not been paying furniture or book allowances in an attempt to try to mitigate the situation that the circuit is finding itself in. The circuit staff themselves have also tried to mitigate the situation, the financial situation of the circuit. So at the moment in our circuit, we have 1 minister who is not receiving a housing allowance, even though that minister is staying in his own accommodation. He's not drawing a housing allowance from the circuit, which he technically is entitled to, but he's chosen not to draw that housing allowance from the circuit. And then there is another minister in the circuit who is also not receiving a housing allowance, even though he's staying in his own accommodation. That same minister has opted not to receive any travelling allowance or a cell phone allowance or any other allowance from the circuit. So the circuit staff have also tried from their side to try to mitigate the financial situation that the circuit finds itself in. So the circuit up till now has been drawing on its reserves to pay its assessments to the MCO. The Methodist Connectional Office pays the stipends of ministers, and when a circuit is not paying its assessments to the MCO anymore, the first thing that happens is that ministers no longer receive stipends. And a number of our circuits in our synod have landed in that situation. So about at this stage, up to 1/3 of all ministers in our synod have not received stipends, some for up to 6 months, but the average is around about 3 months that there are ministers who have not received any stipends. Our circuit has been drawing on reserves and so has been able to pay its MCO assessments, but it cannot continue. These reserves are finite, and if we do continue the way that we are, the Wynberg circuit will be in a situation, certainly by the middle of next year, that it will no longer be able to pay assessments, and then ministers will not be paid anymore. So that is why our circuit has decided at this stage to reduce staff from 4 ministers to 3 ministers. The big issue for us as Epworth and Lansdowne is to consider which would be the better or the best venue for our new amalgamated society. So we really have to think very carefully and very deeply about which venue, either the Epworth campus or the Lansdowne campus, which would be best for us. We cannot continue using both, mainly because we have reduced staff, and there is we can't serve those two churches simultaneously, and then also we are going to be amalgamating, and so it doesn't make any real sense to be worshipping in two different venues, as we spoke about a little bit earlier on. So we really have to decide which is the better venue for us. If we look at Epworth as our potential new venue, we have to look at the advantages of Epworth and the disadvantages of Epworth. The advantages of moving all our operations to Epworth are that there's a bigger sanctuary. Epworth does have a bigger sanctuary than Lansdowne. It also has space for a worship team, which is, I think, quite a good plus for the Epworth sanctuary. Epworth has more parking, especially if we open both sides. There is more parking, and there is also parking on the street if there is a really big overflow. There is a lovely connection between the church and the hall undercover, and so especially if it's raining or the weather's not good, there is a lovely space between the church and the hall, and it does have a very nice atmosphere. We must acknowledge that there are some people who live close by and who are able to walk to church on a Sunday. What are the disadvantages of Epworth? I think we have to acknowledge that the acoustics in the hall at Epworth is very bad. It's very difficult to hear if you are in a meeting in that hall. We also have to acknowledge that our building is not in a good state at all. Our roof is in urgent need of repair, and that is going to cost approximately 200,000, never mind all the other issues, building issues that have to be attended to. Some of them are really starting to become urgent. The other disadvantage of Epworth is that there are no small breakaway rooms or classrooms. It's very difficult to have smaller meetings because there are no smaller venues at Epworth. It's difficult to have separate classes for the Sunday school because we don't have smaller venues. The other disadvantage of Epworth is that it doesn't have office space. It just has those two little offices at the back, those two vestry spaces at the back of at the front of the church. But there's no real office space. And if one were to try to turn those two offices into proper office, people would have to walk through the church to have access to those offices. The kitchen is also quite small at Epworth. And then, of course, Epworth is off the main taxi routes, which puts Epworth at quite a disadvantage in terms of accessibility, given that a lot of people come to church via taxi, and that is the way they get, that's the main mode of transport. Now, if we look at Lansdowne, and we look at the advantages and the disadvantages of Lansdowne. The advantages of moving our operations to Lansdowne are that, first of all, Lansdowne has multiple meeting venues and spaces. It has a big hall, it has a small hall, it has classrooms. And the other huge advantage of Lansdowne is that it has a big hall that has excellent acoustics, and we have experienced that now while having our in-person COVID services there. We haven't had any amplification. We haven't needed it because of the excellent acoustics in that hall. Lansdowne, of course, is on the main transport route. There are taxis up and down that road, and Prince Arthur Road is also very busy. It's the main access route through to Claremont. Lansdowne too has some people who walk to church. Lansdowne has an office, very good office space. It has, it's in the process of establishing a new preschool for income generation. Annie's Ark needed to close down during COVID, but Annie's Ark will be starting again under new management from the beginning of next year. And so Lansdowne will have a full-time preschool on the premises that will also we'll be able to derive income from that. It has a big kitchen. Its buildings are not in an excellent state, but they are in a reasonable state. A little bit of paint would go a long way to spruce up the Lansdowne plant. And then, of course, Lansdowne has Wi-Fi, which is quite a big advantage, especially now, given that a lot of our services and meetings are going online. What are the disadvantages of Lansdowne? We have a smaller sanctuary at Lansdowne. At a push, perhaps we could get 120 people in there. But comfortably 100 people could fit into the Lansdowne sanctuary. Bigger services would have to move into the hall. There is a very small space for a worship team at Lansdowne, which is a disadvantage. It's not impossible, but the space is small. And then Lansdowne also has the disadvantage of a lack of overflow parking. It does have quite a big parking area, and it is possible to park up the side of the building. But overflow parking would have to move onto the street or around the corner, which is a bit of a disadvantage of Lansdowne. And so, friends, what is the way forward for us? We have to decide before the quarterly meeting which venue is the best for us for our new church from the 1st of January 2022. And so let's first of all look for the positive. Let's not turn this into something completely negative, but let's deliberately and intentionally look for the positive in this, that our two churches are amalgamating into one new church. And so let's look for the positive. I think it's important for us to say to one another that we are not closing, but that we are amalgamating. We are not closing either Epworth or Lansdowne. We are amalgamating our operations, and we will be using one venue only. So it's important that we say to one another, and it's linked to the first thing about the positive. The second is that we are not closing, we are amalgamating. This is part of the positive. We will be paying a considerably smaller assessment, given that there will only be 3 ministers in the circuit next year. And so at this stage, the proposal from the circuit is that we would take an approximately a 43% reduction in our assessment. If you put the Epworth and the Lansdowne assessments together, the proposed assessment for our new church next year would be 43% less. So that immediately gives an immense relief, financial relief to us. And then, of course, if we were able to derive income from either the Epworth or the rental of the Epworth or the Lansdowne operation, then there would be extra funds coming into the circuit. However, we do need to acknowledge the emotional attachments to our buildings. There are people who were, especially at Epworth, who were involved in the physical building right from the start, who were involved in the establishment of that society. And we need to acknowledge the emotional attachments with regard to the Garden of Remembrances. Both churches have a Garden of Remembrance, and those venues are very special to a number of people. And so we need to acknowledge those emotional attachments, and whichever venue we use, we'd have to be very careful about preserving that particular part of our heritage in terms of our emotional attachments to the gardens of remembrance. However, we do need to say also that the church is not a building, but the people. It really doesn't, it's not the biggest issue about where we worship together. The fact is that we are worshiping together as one church, and we will be amalgamating as the two churches, Epworth and Lansdowne. And so we need to be saying to one another that the church is not a building, but it's the people. And so, lastly, let's make a decision that is best for the kingdom of God here. In spite of all the emotional attachments, in spite of all the things that we might feel, let's ask God to guide us at this stage. And so may God give us wisdom and insight as we come to decide on where we need to worship next year and which is best for us as a church. God bless you.